There was a problem with Dan Marino. The problem wasn't that he had the strongest arm in football. It wasn't that he was the fastest quarterback. It wasn't even that he was the most athletic. The problem was much simpler. By the time defenders realized Marino was throwing the ball, it was often already gone. For years, defensive coordinators tried to solve him the same way they solved every other quarterback. Pressure him, hit him, make him move, force him to hesitate, take away his first read. But Marino had an answer. And sometimes, that answer was simply to throw the ball before the defense could finish its plan. His release was so quick that receivers didn't always need to be completely open when Marino made the decision to throw. He trusted his arm, he trusted the timing, and most importantly, he trusted himself. That confidence would eventually turn him into one of the most productive quarterbacks football had ever seen. But it also created a strange problem for the NFL. What do you do when the quarterback's biggest advantage is that you can't get to him before the ball leaves his hand? To understand why Dan Marino became so difficult to contain, you have to go back to the moment when the NFL wasn't even sure it wanted him. Number 1. 26 teams had a chance. The 1983 NFL Draft is remembered as one of the greatest quarterback drafts in league history. John Elway went first, Jim Kelly went 14th, Tony Eason went 15th, Ken O'Brien went 24th, and Dan Marino? He was still sitting there. The Miami Dolphins eventually selected him with the 27th overall pick. 5 quarterbacks had already been chosen. For Marino, this wasn't supposed to be how the story went. He had been a major star at Pittsburgh. He had the arm, he had the confidence, and he had already shown that he could make throws that most quarterbacks couldn't even attempt. But NFL teams had questions. Was his college success enough? Could his style translate? Could he handle the pressure? Could he become a franchise quarterback? Miami took the chance. And very quickly, the questions started disappearing. Marino took over the starting job during his rookie season. By the end of 1983, he had led the AFC in passer rating and helped Miami win the AFC East. The Dolphins had their quarterback, but nobody knew yet what they had actually found. Because Marino wasn't simply going to become good, he was about to force defenses to rethink what a passing offense could do. Number 2. The release. The first thing people noticed was the arm. The second thing they noticed was how quickly the ball came out. Marino didn't need a huge windup. He didn't need to take 3 steps backward and load up like he was throwing a baseball. He could stand in the pocket, barely move his feet, and suddenly, the football was 30 yards downfield. Former Dolphins receiver Mark Ingram later emphasized Marino's lightning-quick delivery and the courage behind it. And that created a problem for defenses. A normal pass rush works because the quarterback needs time. Time to read, time to decide, time to bring the arm forward. Take away that time, and the defense wins. But Marino could compress that entire process. The defender might beat the offensive lineman. He might be 1 step away from Marino, and Marino could still get the ball out. That meant something had to change. Defenses couldn't simply ask, "How do we sack him?" They had to start asking, "How do we make him hesitate?" That was a much harder question, because Marino wasn't waiting for the defense to give him an obvious opening. He was anticipating it, and in 1984, that anticipation became almost impossible to defend. Number 3. Then Marino broke the game. Marino's second season wasn't simply a breakout year. It was an attack on the limits of the position. The Dolphins went 14-2, Marino became league MVP, and he became the first quarterback in NFL history to throw for more than 5,000 yards in a season. He finished with 5,084 yards. Then came the number that made defensive coordinators look at the record book twice. 48 touchdown passes. The previous record was 36. Marino didn't beat it by 1, he didn't beat it by 5, he destroyed it. The difference was 12 touchdowns. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether Marino could throw. Everyone knew he could. The question was, how do you stop him? Pittsburgh found out the hard way. In the 1984 AFC Championship game, Marino threw for 421 yards and 4 touchdowns as Miami defeated the Steelers 45-28. The young quarterback was going to the Super Bowl. And for a moment, it looked as though the NFL had found its next unstoppable force. But there was a problem. Waiting for him in Super Bowl 19 was Joe Montana. And San Francisco had something Marino didn't, a complete machine around its quarterback. Number 4. The game that changed the expectation. Super Bowl 19 wasn't a disaster for Marino. That's important. He completed 29 passes for 318 yards, threw a touchdown, and was playing against one of the great teams of the era. But the 49ers won, 38-16, and suddenly, Marino's story had a new dimension. The question wasn't just, can anybody stop Dan Marino? Now it was, can Dan Marino win when stopping him isn't enough? Because football isn't played by quarterbacks alone. A quarterback can throw for 300 yards, he can break records, he can make impossible throws, and he can still lose. That lesson would follow Marino for the rest of his career, but it would take years before anyone understood just how strange that career was going to become. Because after that Super Bowl, Marino didn't decline, he didn't disappear, he became even more productive. The defenses changed, the league adjusted, and Marino kept finding ways to produce. Number 5. So defenses changed the question. The easiest way to attack an elite quarterback is to make him uncomfortable. Move him, make him hold the football, force him to throw outside his rhythm. But Marino's greatest weapon wasn't just arm strength, it was rhythm. When Marino got into rhythm, the offense could feel almost automatic. 3-step drop, read, throw, first down, again, again, again. The ball came out before the pass rush could fully develop, and if a defense backed away to protect against the deep throw, Marino could take what was underneath. If they crowded the short routes, he could attack deeper. If they tried to bring pressure, he could punish them with timing. The defense wasn't simply fighting Marino's arm, it was fighting his decision-making, and that's why his 1984 season was so important. It proved that Marino didn't need a perfect running game or a mobile quarterback's ability to escape. He could win from the pocket. He could win with anticipation. He could win by making the defense wrong before the defender even realized he had been manipulated. And that was the part that made him different. Number 6. The price of staying in the pocket. But there was a hidden cost to Marino's style. He wasn't a quarterback who wanted to run away from pressure. He wanted to stand there, take the hit if necessary, keep his eyes downfield, and make the throw. That mentality helped create some of the greatest passing performances of his generation. But it also meant Marino absorbed punishment. And eventually, even an elite quarterback's body has limits. In 1993, after 99 consecutive starts, Marino suffered a ruptured Achilles tendon. For the first time, the quarterback who had built so much of his identity around staying in the pocket was forced to leave it behind. The Dolphins had to continue without him. And Marino had to face something he had spent his entire career avoiding. He couldn't simply will himself onto the field. The injury wasn't just a physical setback. It represented the beginning of a different phase of his career. Because the NFL was changing. Marino was getting older. Defenses were still trying to solve him. And the quarterback who once seemed capable of outrunning every defensive adjustment was now going to have to fight something much harder to defeat: time. But Marino wasn't finished. Not even close. When he returned, the arm was still there. The confidence was still there. And the numbers kept coming. But now the question had changed again. It was no longer, can anyone contain Dan Marino? It was, how long can Dan Marino keep doing this? And the answer to that question would define the final half of his career. Because the next stage wasn't about becoming a better quarterback. It was about discovering how much of the old Dan Marino he could still keep. The part nobody could stop, the Achilles injury, should have changed Dan Marino. For most quarterbacks, it would have. But when Marino returned in 1994, something important became clear. The injury had taken time away from him. It had not taken away his ability to throw. He came back and immediately produced another enormous season. More than 4,400 passing yards, 30 touchdown passes, and another Pro Bowl appearance. The quarterback was still there, but the NFL around him wasn't, and that difference would become increasingly important. Because Marino had spent the first part of his career proving that defenses couldn't contain his passing game. Now he was entering the part of his career where he had to prove something much harder. Could he keep winning when the physical advantages around him began disappearing? Number 7. The defenses finally found something to attack. The easiest mistake to make when looking back at Marino is assuming that his lack of another Super Bowl was simply about bad luck. It wasn't that simple. Football had changed. Defenses were becoming more sophisticated. Teams knew Marino's tendencies. They knew how quickly he wanted to get the ball out. They knew where Miami wanted to attack. And they knew that if they could force Marino away from his rhythm, they had a chance. The goal was no longer necessarily to sack him. It was to make him uncomfortable. Force him to hold the football for an extra second. Make him move his feet. Take away the first option, make him throw from a platform he didn't want. Because with Marino, an extra second could be everything. A quarterback with a slower release might survive the disruption. Marino had built his game around precision. The timing had to be right. The receiver had to be where Marino expected him to be. And the football had to leave his hand before the defense could close the window. So defenses began attacking the timing itself, and for the first time, Marino had to fight an opponent he couldn't simply overpower with his arm. Number 8. The arm was still there. This is what makes the second half of Marino's career so fascinating. He wasn't suddenly a bad quarterback, far from it. He continued producing seasons that most quarterbacks would have considered career years. He kept making throws that seemed physically impossible. He kept moving Miami's offense. He kept putting up numbers, but there was a difference. The younger Marino could make the defense pay for almost any mistake. The older Marino had to work harder to create those mistakes. The difference was subtle, and that's what made it dangerous. A quarterback doesn't suddenly wake up one morning and become a different player. It happens gradually. One movement becomes harder. One recovery takes longer. One throw requires more effort. One hit hurts a little more. And eventually, the things that used to happen automatically require concentration. Marino's greatest weapon had always been repetition. He knew where the ball needed to go. He knew when it needed to leave. He knew exactly how much time he had. But now the margins were becoming smaller. And when you're playing quarterback at the highest level, the smallest margins can decide everything. Number 9. The records kept coming there. Was an irony to Marino's later career. While people questioned whether he could still win at the highest level, he continued moving higher in the record books. He became the first quarterback to reach milestones that had previously seemed impossible. His passing numbers continued climbing, and by the time he retired after the 1999 season, Marino had accumulated 4,967 completions, 61,361 passing yards, 420 touchdown passes. At the time of his retirement, all three were NFL career records. ProFootballHoff.com. Read those numbers again. 61,361 yards, 420 touchdowns, nearly 5,000 completions. This wasn't a quarterback who had one incredible season and disappeared. This was a quarterback who maintained elite production across 17 seasons. And yet every time his career was discussed, the same question returned. Where was the championship? That question became so powerful that it threatened to overshadow everything else. But Marino couldn't control how people judged him. He could only control what happened when he stepped onto the field. And for 17 years, he kept doing the same thing. He kept throwing. Number 10. The final chance. By 1999, Marino was 38 years old. The young quarterback who had entered the league with a cannon for an arm was now nearing the end. Miami made the playoffs, and Marino had one more opportunity to change the ending. One more chance. One more postseason. One more run. Instead, the season ended in humiliation. The Dolphins traveled to Jacksonville for the wildcard round. And the Jaguars didn't simply beat Miami, they destroyed them. 62-7. Marino finished the game with only 95 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Pro Football Hoff. It was almost impossible to connect that afternoon with the quarterback who had once thrown for 5,084 yards in a season. But that's exactly what made it so brutal. The career didn't end with a final masterpiece. It ended with the game getting away from him. And after 17 seasons, Marino retired. No second Super Bowl appearance, no Lombardi Trophy, no final comeback, just an extraordinary career ending in one of the ugliest playoff losses imaginable. But here's where the story gets interesting, because retirement didn't make the debate disappear, it made it bigger. Number 11. The question that never died after Marino retired. People continued arguing about him. Some said the lack of a championship mattered. Others argued that evaluating a quarterback entirely by Super Bowl victories ignored the fact that football is the ultimate team sport. And then there were the people who simply remembered watching him. They remembered the release, the velocity, the confidence, the way the ball seemed to explode out of his hand. They remembered third and long situations where everyone in the stadium knew Miami needed a first down, and somehow Marino would find it. They remembered the comeback drives. They remembered the impossible throws. They remembered the feeling that even when the Dolphins were losing, the game wasn't over as long as Marino still had the ball. That feeling matters, because statistics can tell you how much a quarterback produced. They can't completely explain what it felt like to watch him. And that is why Marino's legacy survived the championship debate. Number 12. The part people forgot. There's another reason Marino's career deserves to be viewed differently. He didn't play in today's NFL. He played during an era when passing wasn't nearly as protected as it is now. Quarterbacks could take punishment. Defensive backs could be far more physical. Offenses weren't designed around producing the enormous passing numbers we see today. And Marino still produced at a level that changed the expectations for the position. His 1984 season wasn't simply a record season. It was a glimpse into the future. Modern NFL offenses would eventually make enormous passing totals normal. But Marino was doing it decades earlier. He showed what could happen when an elite pocket passer combined anticipation, timing, arm strength, confidence, and accuracy. He didn't need to run. He didn't need to escape every sack. He didn't need to wait for the receiver to become completely open. He trusted what he saw, and he trusted that his arm could get the ball there. That confidence was part of what made him great. It was also part of what made the end of his career so difficult. Because when your entire game is built around precision, the loss of even a fraction of that precision can change everything. Number 13. What Marino actually lost. Marino didn't lose his talent. He didn't suddenly forget how to read a defense. He didn't lose the ability to throw a football. What he lost was something much harder to notice: margin for error. When he was young, Marino could recover. If a play broke down, he could still make the throw. If the defense brought pressure, he could release the ball before the hit arrived. If the window was tiny, he could fit the football through it. But as the years passed, the physical cost became more important. The injuries mattered. The age mattered. The supporting cast mattered. The changing league mattered. And eventually, the championship window closed. That's the painful part of Marino's story. He didn't spend 17 years being a failure. He spent 17 years being extraordinarily good. He simply couldn't reproduce that one moment from 1984. He couldn't get back to the Super Bowl. And because football culture loves simple explanations, his career was sometimes reduced to one sentence: great quarterback, never won a Super Bowl. But that sentence leaves out almost everything that made Dan Marino extraordinary. Number 14. The legacy beyond the ring. When Marino retired, he wasn't simply leaving football with a pile of statistics. He was leaving behind a blueprint. A blueprint for the pure pocket passer. A quarterback didn't have to be the fastest athlete on the field. He didn't have to scramble for 500 yards. He could win with anticipation. He could win with accuracy. He could win by getting the football out before the defense could react. And Marino demonstrated that at a level few had ever seen. His records would eventually fall. That's inevitable. Every generation produces someone faster, stronger, or more productive. But the fact that other quarterbacks eventually passed Marino doesn't erase what he did. It proves how far the game moved after him. Marino helped establish a new standard. And decades later, when people watch quarterbacks release the football almost instantly, they are watching a style Marino helped make famous. Number 15. The man after the quarterback. Then came another chapter, one that had nothing to do with passing yards. After football, Marino became deeply involved in charitable work, including through the Dan Marino Foundation, which supports people with autism and other developmental disabilities. That part of his life doesn't fit neatly into a quarterback statistic. There is no passer rating for it, no playoff record, no Super Bowl ring. But it reveals another side of the man who had spent his entire career being judged by football. The quarterback who had once been obsessed with winning games now had another purpose: helping people, building something beyond football. And perhaps that's the part that makes the entire story feel different in retrospect. Because when you're playing, the scoreboard seems permanent. A loss feels permanent. A missed opportunity feels permanent. But careers eventually end. Records eventually fall. And the question becomes, what remains when the game is gone? For Marino, the answer wasn't just 61,361 yards. It wasn't 420 touchdowns. It wasn't even the records. It was the influence, the memories, and the feeling he left with an entire generation of football fans. The final question: so was Dan Marino a failure because he never won another Super Bowl? No. But was the missing championship a real part of his story? Absolutely. That's what makes his career so fascinating. He was good enough to make the impossible look routine, good enough to destroy records, good enough to change how people thought about quarterback play, good enough to remain one of the most recognizable names in NFL history. And yet there was one mountain he never climbed again: the Super Bowl. Maybe that's why Dan Marino remains such a fascinating figure. Because his career doesn't have a perfect ending. It doesn't give you the easy conclusion. It gives you a contradiction. One of the greatest quarterbacks ever, without the championship that people thought greatness required. And maybe the best way to understand Marino isn't to ask why he didn't win more. Maybe the better question is, how did a quarterback who never won another Super Bowl become impossible to remove from the conversation about the greatest quarterbacks who ever played? The answer is sitting in the numbers. It's sitting in the film, it's sitting in the memories of the people who watched him, and it's in that lightning-fast release. The moment Marino saw the opening, he didn't wait, he threw. And for 17 seasons, defenses knew exactly what was coming. They just couldn't always stop it.